The quiet revolution of the Model T falling asleep in America's first car section 1. A nation at dusk, waiting for change. America in the first years of the 20th century was a place of twilight contrasts. By day, factories whirred and cities stretched taller, but by night, the world slowed under the soft glow of gas lamps and the creak of horse-drawn carriages. The roads, rutted dirt paths, and cobblestone streets carried the echoes of hoofbeats and wagon wheels, sounds as old as the Republic itself. Please subscribe my channel and press bell icon for new updates. If you had stood on the edge of a small Midwestern town in 1908, you might have smelled wood smoke from kitchen stoves drifting lazily through the crisp evening air. The faint ring of a blacksmith's hammer would fade into cricket song, and the horizon would darken into a velvet sky thick with stars. For most Americans, travel was still a patient, plodding affair. Journeys between towns meant hours or days of jostling wagons or expensive train tickets. The idea of personal freedom on the open road was more fantasy than fact. Yet something was stirring quietly in Detroit's workshops, a new kind of machine that promised to reshape life's rhythms. Henry Ford, a man with a farmer's practicality and an inventor's imagination, was perfecting a car not for the wealthy few, but for the ordinary many. People had heard whispers of automobiles, of course. In big cities, you might spot a wealthy industrialist chugging past in a smoky, sputtering contraption that smelled of oil and adventure. But for most Americans, these early cars were noisy curiosities, expensive, temperamental, and as likely to break down as to reach their destination. The average shopkeeper or farmhand could no more afford one than they could a private yacht. The car was a symbol of modernity, yes, but not yet a part of daily life. Still, progress has a way of creeping in quietly. Families would gather on their porches at dusk, rocking in wooden chairs, and speculate about what these machines might mean. Could they really replace the faithful horses that had carried generations across muddy fields and country lanes? Would they make travel faster or simply more complicated? In church basements and general stores, the conversations flickered like the lantern light, a mixture of skepticism and wonder. The evening newspapers occasionally carried stories of daring motorists who braved long distances, their tires blown and engines hissing. The idea seemed equal parts thrilling and absurd. But beneath the skepticism was a quiet yearning, an unspoken desire to break free from the slow, predictable rhythms of rural life. The dawn of a new era rarely arrives with trumpets. More often, it approaches like this, softly on wagon wheels about to be replaced, in the steady breaths of families who do not yet realize that change is at their doorstep. Imagine the scene. A sleepy town square, the wooden sidewalks damp from a recent rain. The smell of fresh hay lingers near the stables, while kerosene lamps flicker in shop windows. A lone telegraph operator closes his station for the night, the last clicks of Morse code fading like distant fireflies. The world feels secure in its familiar ways, yet fragile, as though some invisible hand is about to lift the curtain on a different future. In the distance, you hear a faint mechanical cough, strange, unfamiliar. A headlight, brighter than any lantern, glows briefly before vanishing down the road. Somewhere in that fleeting moment is a whisper of tomorrow, a future where children will doze off in the back seats of cars, where Sunday drives will become family rituals, and where America's vast landscapes will feel smaller beneath a canopy of stars and telephone wires. For now, though, the country slumbers on. The horses are tethered, the trains idle in their depots, and the Model T is still a dream taking shape in Henry Ford's mind. The night holds its breath. Change is coming, not loudly, but like a quiet revolution rolling gently toward the horizon. Section 2. Henry Ford's dream in a modest workshop in a small, drafty workshop in Detroit. The smell of oil and sawdust mingled with the metallic tang of cold steel. Henry Ford was no stranger to hard work or failure. Before the Model T, he had watched two of his automobile ventures sputter and die. dismissed by investors as reckless experiments. But Ford wasn't chasing glory or quick profit. He was chasing a vision. He believed that the automobile could become as commonplace as the family horse, a tool for ordinary people rather than a toy for the elite. The workshop itself was unremarkable. Wooden rafters blackened by smoke, floors scuffed by boots and grease stained from years of tinkering. On the workbench lay sketches of gears and axles, simple and clear. Ford had an instinct for efficiency, an almost obsessive desire to strip away anything unnecessary. Simplicity, he often said, is the foundation of progress. By 1908, other automakers were producing cars, but they catered to society's upper crust. Ford, on the other hand, envisioned a car durable enough for dirt roads, affordable enough for farmers, and easy enough to repair with basic tools. It was a revolutionary idea wrapped in humility. His contemporaries laughed. Why build for people who couldn't even afford an automobile? But Ford understood something they didn't. The future belonged not to the wealthy few, but to the working many. Evenings in Detroit during these years had a certain energy. The city was alive with the buzz of industry, machine shops clanking, furnaces roaring, and the distant hum of electric streetcars. Ford would leave his workshop late, the chill wind off the Detroit River nipping at his coat. He'd walk past rows of modest houses, their windows glowing with lamplight, and imagine his car parked outside one of them. He pictured families piling in, mothers in long skirts, fathers in rolled-up sleeves, children giggling in the back, setting off down unpaved roads towards some unknown adventure. The Model T was born not just from mechanical ingenuity, but from empathy. Ford understood the weariness of farmers who spent half a day hauling produce to market. He understood the longing of families separated by miles of country road. He knew that the car could be more than a machine. It could be a bridge between lives and places. The first prototype took shape slowly, each bolt tightened by calloused hands, each gear tested and retested. Workers who witnessed it recalled the quiet focus that settled over Ford when he was deep in thought. He was not a man of bombast. He was a man who believed in progress by increments. Outside the workshop, the world was moving fast, cities swelling, electricity spreading, but inside, progress was being built one careful turr wrench at a time. Picture the scene. Lantern light flickering across blueprints, the rhythmic scrape of a file against metal, the occasional hiss of steam. In the corner, a pot-bellied stove glows faintly, warming the chilled air. Ford pauses, wipes his brow with a rag, and studies the frame of what will soon become the Model T. He imagines the hum of its engine on a lonely country road, the smell of gasoline mingling with fresh-cut hay, the wide-eyed wonder of a child seeing their first automobile. Outside, Detroit settles into its nighttime rhythm. The river whispers against the docks, and somewhere a factory whistle signals the end of a shift. Few could guess that in this modest workshop, a revolution was quietly being assembled. Ford's dream was not just about cars. It was about freedom, connection, and the promise that ordinary people could claim a piece of the modern world. The Model T would not be perfect. It would rattle, sputter, and demand patience. But it would move, and in that movement, it would change everything. The revolution was not loud yet, but its heartbeat could already be heard in the gentle clatter of tools on wood and the unwavering determination of a man who believed that progress belonged to everyone. Section 3. The birth of a moving assembly line, the Model T, was an extraordinary idea, but even extraordinary ideas can falter if they're too expensive or too slow to produce. By 1913, Henry Ford understood this all too well. The demand for his new automobile was growing. Farmers, shopkeepers, and teachers all wanted a piece of the modern world, but the pace of hand-building cars could not keep up. The answer lay not in more workers or longer hours, but in a radical rethinking of how a car was born. Ford found inspiration in unlikely places. He visited Chicago's meat-packing plants, where animal carcasses moved past stationary butchers on overhead rails. The efficiency stunned him. Instead of workers chasing their work, the work came to them. Ford flipped the concept. Why not bring the parts to the workers instead of having workers scramble around the parts? Back in Detroit, his team began experimenting. They arranged wooden platforms on wheels, added hooks and pulleys, and tinkered with ways to keep parts flowing. At first, it was chaotic. Workers stumbled over each other, tools went missing, and half-assembled cars jammed the line. But Ford's genius was patience. He studied the failures, adjusted the process, and tried again. Slowly, the chaos turned into rhythm. Imagine the first successful assembly line, the soft clank of metal, the hiss of steam, and the steady shuffle of boots on the factory floor. Men in caps and rolled-up sleeves stood shoulder to shoulder, each performing a single task, tightening a bolt, fitting a wheel, attaching a fender. The work was repetitive, but its elegance was undeniable. The moving line transformed production from an art into a science. The results were astonishing. Building a single Model T once took over 12 hours. With the moving assembly line, the time dropped to just 90 minutes. The cost of the car plummeted, and for the first time, a working family could imagine owning their own automobile. This wasn't just efficiency, it was democratization. Ford had not merely built a car, he had built a bridge to modernity. The assembly line reshaped more than the factory floor. It reshaped life itself. Workers earned enough to buy the very cars they assembled, and America's small towns began to hum with the possibility of travel. The dusty distances between farms and cities suddenly shrank. A trip that once required planning, provisions, and a sturdy horse could now be taken on a whim. Close your eyes and picture Detroit in 1914. Outside the factory, rows of freshly built Model Ts gleam in the morning light, their black paint catching the sun. The air smells faintly of oil and varnish. Inside, the line hums steadily, like a mechanical heartbeat. The men are tired, yes, but there's a quiet pride in their work. They know they're not just tightening bolts, they're tightening the threads of a new America. The moving assembly line would go on to influence industries far beyond automobiles. From radios to refrigerators, the concept spread like wildfire, transforming how goods were made and how quickly they reached the world. But in these first days, under the dim glow of factory lamps and the echo of distant whistles, it was simply a revolutionary experiment. A simple idea that would carry families across state lines. In the silence of late-night Detroit, when the factory finally went dark and the city's hum softened, a single Model T might sit outside, waiting to be tested. Its metal skin was still warm from the day's work, its tires dusty from the shop floor. Somewhere, a night watchman might pause to look at it and wonder, not just about the machine itself, but about the roads it would travel and the lives it would touch. Change, once again, was waiting quietly under the stars. Section 4. First drive through small town streets, the first time a Model T rattled down a quiet country lane. The world itself seemed to pause. Small towns that had known only the rhythmic clip-clop of horse hooves now felt the low, steady hum of an engine, an alien sound, both thrilling and unsettling. Children abandoned marbles in the dust to chase after the strange contraption, their laughter echoing between barns and general stores. Dogs barked, startled by the smell of gasoline and the unfamiliar rattle of gears. In places like rural, neighbors leaned on fence rails, squinting in the sunlight as the car approached, its boxy silhouette shimmering in the heat haze. "Looks like the future," someone might murmur, shading their eyes. For many, it was the first time they'd seen modernity on wheels, a glimpse of a world that was suddenly wider and faster. Imagine the sensation of those first drivers. The wooden steering wheel felt strange beneath calloused hands used to holding reins. The road ahead stretched open, promising freedom but demanding caution. Each rattle of the frame over a rut was both a jolt and a thrill. Inside, the bench seat creaked as passengers clutched their hats against the rushing wind. The faint tang of oil mingled with the scent of cornfields and freshly cut hay. These early drives weren't smooth. Country roads were little more than dirt paths, and every rain turned them into muddy quagmires. Cars would sink to their axles or slide sideways on slippery inclines. But for all the mishaps, there was magic. A Sunday drive to a neighboring town could feel like an expedition to another world. A trip to the fair no longer meant hitching a horse at dawn. It could be a spur-of-the-moment decision after lunch. Small-town merchants soon noticed the difference. A farmer who could reach a larger market faster might sell more crops. A teacher could attend a distant lecture and bring back fresh ideas. Even families who couldn't afford a car themselves benefited when friends offered rides. The Model T was not just transportation. It was a thread weaving communities closer together. Picture, for a moment, a summer evening in 1915. The sun dips low, and fireflies spark over the fields. A Model T chugs slowly down Main Street, its headlights casting warm cones of light across shop windows. A few townsfolk linger on the porch of the hardware store, fanning themselves with newspapers, and wave as the car passes. The engine's soft sputter becomes part of the evening chorus, blending with crickets and the distant whistle of a train. For many, these scenes planted dreams. Young men imagined road trips beyond the horizon. Children saw adventure in every winding road. And even the elders, those who had lived through horse-drawn decades, couldn't help but feel a touch of wonder. The Model T wasn't merely a machine. It was an invitation to reimagine life's pace and possibilities. In quiet kitchens and on back porches, conversations changed. What if we drove to the city for Christmas shopping? What if we could visit Aunt Clara without the overnight train? These were small thoughts, perhaps, but they hinted at a larger shift. The idea that distance no longer defined destiny. The car had made the world smaller, more intimate, and infinitely more reachable. As you drift off tonight, picture those dusty roads under a blanket of stars, a lone Model T rumbling past sleeping houses. Its driver feels the cool night air on their face, the wooden wheels clicking softly over stones. Somewhere ahead, the world waits, bigger now, closer now, because one quiet revolution on four wheels has begun to carry them toward it. Section 5. Family road trips and new American dreams. By the late 1910s, the Model T had become more than a curiosity. It was a member of the family. For the first time, American households could dream beyond the borders of their towns without calculating the price of train tickets or the stamina of their horses. The open road, once a poetic notion, became a practical invitation. Families packed lunches into wicker baskets, wrapped quilts against the chill, and loaded their children into the bench seats of their sturdy Fords. Picture a warm Saturday morning in 1920. Dew still clings to the grass, and the smell of coffee drifts from the farmhouse kitchen. A father checks the tires, tightening bolts with deliberate care. The children buzz with excitement, their small shoes kicking up dust as they wait by the car. The mother tucks sandwiches, apples, and a jar of lemonade into a wooden crate. The engine coughs to life, and a chorus of cheers fills the yard. The road ahead stretches endlessly, a ribbon of dirt bordered by cornfields and distant hills. Inside the car, the wooden frame creaks and the canvas roof flutters in the wind. The scent of warm earth mingles with the faint tang of oil. A radio jingle from a passing farmhouse floats through the air, mixing with birdsong. Each mile feels like an adventure, even if the destination is only a county fair or a lake an hour away. These journeys redefined leisure. No longer confined to the rhythms of the railroad, families could set their own pace. They could stop to watch a hawk circle above a meadow or detour to a roadside fruit stand. The car gave them control over time itself, and in that control, they found freedom. The Model T also created memories that would echo for decades. A child asleep on the back seat, lulled by the steady hum of the engine. A couple sharing a quiet moment under a canopy of stars, the car parked at a scenic overlook. A picnic by a rushing creek, the Ford's tires dusted with pollen and gravel. These moments stitched themselves into the fabric of family histories, carried forward in stories told at reunions and holidays. Economically, these road trips began to reshape the nation. Small businesses, diners, gas stations, roadside motels sprang up to serve the new wave of travelers. A sleepy crossroads could transform into a bustling stopover, and a struggling farm stand could thrive by selling peaches to passing motorists. The Model T didn't just move people, it moved prosperity. Imagine the feeling of driving as the sun sets behind the hills, casting the world in amber and violet light. The engine hums, the tires crunch over gravel, and the breeze carries the scent of wildflowers. The family in the Ford feels infinite possibilities unfolding in every direction. They may not know it, but they're living a new kind of American dream, one powered by curiosity, connection, and the simple joy of movement. As the stars appear, the road quiets. The family's laughter fades into soft conversation, and finally, into contented silence. The car's headlights carve two narrow paths of light through the darkness. Somewhere ahead, a town waits with its glowing windows and familiar faces. But for now, the journey itself is enough. The hum of the engine, the cool night air, and the promise of tomorrow's horizon. In that quiet, rolling moment, America was not just a place on a map. It was a road stretching endlessly forward, a dream made tangible on four wheels, and a lullaby sung by tires and wind. Section 6. How Ford's 5 workday changed lives when Henry Ford announced in 1914 that he would pay his factory workers $5 a day, double the average wage of the time. The news rippled across America like a shockwave. Newspapers screamed headlines that sounded almost unbelievable. A man could earn enough in one day to buy food for a week or even begin saving for a home. For workers who had been trapped in low-wage, back-breaking jobs, the offer felt like a golden ticket. The assembly lines in Detroit buzzed with anticipation. Men stood in long lines outside the Ford Motor Company gates, lunch pails in hand, eyes full of hope. Inside, the rhythmic clang of machines and the whir of conveyor belts became the heartbeat of a new kind of industry. The Model T was already reshaping transportation, but the 5 workday was about to reshape society itself. The change wasn't just financial, it was psychological. For the first time, thousands of workers felt that their labor was valued. They could provide more than survival for their families. They could dream. A Ford worker might finish his shift, step outside into the cool evening air, and think not just about paying rent, but about taking his children on their first road trip, or saving for a piano, or perhaps even a Model T of his own. In kitchens across America, conversations changed. A wife might smile over a pot of stew, knowing the week's wages would stretch further. Children might whisper about Christmas gifts that seemed impossible before. The idea that ordinary families could participate in the consumer world, buying not just what they needed but also what they desired, was revolutionary. The ripple effects extended far beyond Ford's factory walls. Competing companies, afraid of losing their best workers, began to raise their own wages. Economists later argued that this policy helped create the middle class, a pillar of modern American life. Ford himself admitted that the higher wages weren't purely altruistic. Better-paid workers could afford to buy the cars they built, creating a self-sustaining cycle of production and consumption. On the factory floor, the work was still grueling. The assembly line demanded speed, precision, and endurance. But the knowledge that the day's labor would provide real security softened some of the hardship. A worker could look down the line at the endless frames of Model Ts and feel pride, not just in the machine, but in the life he was building. Imagine the soundscape of that era. The hiss of steam, the metallic clatter of parts being fitted, the sharp smell of oil and hot metal, and overall, the chatter of men discussing their plans. Someone jokes about taking his sweetheart to the county fair in a Model T. Another dreams aloud about a small plot of land outside the city. In those small exchanges, you can hear the beginning of a social shift. Ordinary people believing that tomorrow might be better than today. This optimism carried out into the streets. As more workers earned enough to buy cars, the roads grew livelier. Rural families could visit towns more easily. City dwellers could escape to the countryside. Entire industries, restaurants, roadside inns, and service stations sprang up to cater to the new mobility. The Model T wasn't just a product. It was the engine of an economic and cultural awakening. As night falls in Detroit, a tired worker walks home under the glow of street lamps. His boots are scuffed, his hands smell of grease, but his step is light. In his pocket, the day's wages feel solid and reassuring. He passes by storefront windows filled with goods he can now imagine buying. Somewhere, his children are waiting, sleepy-eyed but eager to hear about his day. And tomorrow, he'll return to the factory, not just for a paycheck, but for the promise of a future that seems suddenly within reach. Section 7, Roads, Motels, and the birth of car culture. By the early 1920s, the rumble of Model Ts had become a familiar sound on dusty lanes and cobbled streets. What began as scattered family excursions was now a nationwide movement. Americans were on the move, and the landscape was changing to greet them. Roads that had once been rough, winding trails of mud and stone began to transform under the weight of demand. Communities lobbied for paved highways, knowing that smooth roads could bring prosperity to their doorsteps. Picture a small-town main street at twilight, the fading sun painting the storefront windows in warm amber. A few Model Ts roll through, their lantern-like headlights casting slender beams onto shop signs and picket fences. The smell of fresh asphalt hangs faintly in the air, a new road completed just that week. Shopkeepers linger in their doorways, watching the flow of traffic with curiosity and hope. Entrepreneurs recognized an opportunity. The humble motor car had created an entirely new way to travel, and with it, a need for services. Roadside diners began popping up, offering hot coffee, homemade pie, and friendly conversation to weary travelers. Gas stations, once a rarity, became beacons of light on dark country roads. A single pump and a wooden sign reading fuel could turn an empty stretch of highway into a destination. And then there were the motels. Before the automobile, overnight accommodations were found in city hotels or rural inns reached by rail. Now, families needed places to rest along unfamiliar routes. The first motels, simple rows of cabins with clean beds and a porch light, offered something revolutionary: the freedom to stop wherever the road led. Imagine pulling off a highway after a long day's drive. The gravel crunches under the tires as the Model T rolls up to a tidy cabin. The air smells faintly of pine and dust. A neon sign flickers softly in the dusk, welcoming travelers with its glow. Inside, the room is modest but inviting: a bed with a patchwork quilt, a wooden chair, and a window cracked open to let in the night breeze. For the weary family, it feels like a palace. The birth of car culture was not just about infrastructure, it was about mindset. Travel was no longer rigid or predictable. A family could start the day heading north and decide by noon to veer west toward the mountains. Detours weren't obstacles, they were part of the adventure. The road trip became a uniquely American ritual, blending spontaneity with discovery. Local economies flourished. A farmer could sell peaches by the roadside to strangers passing through. A craftsman might open a small shop by a highway curve, drawing customers who'd never have found him otherwise. Even the tiniest towns began to feel connected to the wider world, their futures tied to the flow of cars and the hum of engines. Car clubs and road maps emerged, fostering a sense of community among travelers. Men in leather driving gloves compared routes, while families exchanged recommendations for the best diners or scenic overlooks. The open road became more than a means to an end. It became a symbol of freedom and connection. As night fell on America's growing network of highways, headlights traced silver lines through the darkness, linking distant towns and dreams. Somewhere, a child gazed out the car window at the stars, lulled by the gentle sway of the Ford and the whisper of tires on pavement. For that child, the world felt vast and reachable all at once. The Model T hadn't just reshaped transportation, it had redrawn the map of possibility. The country was now a web of journeys waiting to be taken, of stories waiting to be lived, and of sleepy motels promising rest before another day of adventure. In every hum of an engine and every flicker of a roadside sign, America was reinventing itself on the move. Section 8. The Model T in popular culture and memory. By the time the Roaring '20s were in full swing, the Model T had already become more than a car. It was a cultural icon. It wasn't just a machine that moved people, it had begun to move imaginations. Across the country, it appeared in songs, jokes, films, and family scrapbooks, immortalized in ways that few inventions ever are. In silent films, the Model T often played the role of scrappy sidekick. Directors loved its quirky looks and bouncy ride. Audiences laughed as slapstick comedians chased after runaway Fords, their wheels wobbling comically on dirt roads. The car's reliability was real, but its cartoonish movements on film made it a character in its own right. Humble, enduring, and sometimes hilariously clumsy. In small-town theaters, vaudeville performers poked fun at Ford's creation. One popular routine featured a comedian claiming his Model T was so slow that birds landed on the hood for a rest. Jokes like these only deepened affection for the car. The humor came from a place of familiarity. Nearly everyone had ridden in one or known someone who had. The Model T also made its mark in music. Folk songs and early country tunes celebrated the freedom of the open road, often naming the Tin Lizzie as the faithful companion of wandering dreamers. Its steady chug became a symbol of adventure, an audible heartbeat of a restless generation seeking something beyond their hometown horizon. Advertising, too, wove the Model T into the fabric of memory. Old Ford ads featured illustrations of smiling families beneath slogans like the Universal Car, emphasizing not speed or luxury, but togetherness and possibility. The car was marketed not as a status symbol, but as a gateway, a modest tool for extraordinary journeys. For countless families, the Model T's most enduring role was as a keeper of personal memories. A dusty photo album might reveal an image of grandparents standing proudly beside their first car, their Sunday best pressed neatly, the sun glaring off the hood. Another picture might show a picnic on a roadside, the Model T parked in the background, its rear seat loaded with blankets and a wicker basket. These were not mere snapshots. They were testaments to freedom and progress, captured forever in sepia tones. Schools and community parades often featured decorated Fords, festooned with bunting and flowers to celebrate local events. A single car could transport the homecoming queen, pull a float, and later serve as the family's workhorse on the farm. The Model T was everywhere at once, practical, reliable, and warmly familiar. Even literature found room for Ford's marvel. Writers used it as shorthand for modernity creeping into old ways of life. In small-town America, a dusty Model T rolling past a horse-drawn wagon wasn't just transportation. It was a symbol of change, an echo of progress humming on rubber tires. Children of the era often described their first rides in the Model T with awe. The rumble of the engine, the smell of oil and leather, the way the world seemed to blur beyond the windows, all of it felt magical. For a generation raised on stillness and limited horizons, the Model T was movement incarnate. And as decades passed, nostalgia for those simpler drives only deepened. Car collectors lovingly restored surviving Fords, buffing paint until it gleamed like polished amber. Museums dedicated exhibits to the humble vehicle that had once remade a nation. Even now, a restored Model T rolling slowly down a parade route can draw gasps and applause from onlookers who never knew a world without highways and modern cars. The Model T had transcended its role as an automobile. It had become a story, a shared memory whispered across generations. It was proof that progress could feel both thrilling and comforting, and that even a machine of steel and gears could hold a piece of the human heart. Section 9. The sunset of the Model T era by the late 1920s, the world that had welcomed the Model T with open arms was beginning to change. Life was faster, streets were busier, and the expectations of drivers were evolving. The humble Ford that had once seemed miraculous now felt dated to many. Yet, its legacy lingered in every town and city it had touched. Ford recognized the winds of change. Henry himself had long insisted on the beauty of simplicity, but innovation could not stand still. In 1927, after nearly 2 decades of production, the Model T rolled off assembly lines for the final time. It was a bittersweet farewell. Families who had owned their Tin Lizzie for years felt a pang of nostalgia as they watched the last cars leave the factory, their engines echoing the heartbeat of an era. The end of the Model T did not happen quietly. News of the final run stirred communities. Local newspapers ran stories highlighting its contributions, how it had connected isolated farms to markets, carried children to school, and enabled young couples to explore the world beyond their hometown. Advertisements for the newer Model A were already appearing, but for many, the Model T represented a kind of perfection, practical, dependable, and deeply human. In rural America, the transition was particularly poignant. Farmers had relied on the Model T for everything: hauling produce, delivering goods, fetching the mail. The car's versatility meant that for decades, it had been both tool and companion. When newer cars arrived, faster and sleeker, the Model T did not disappear overnight. It lingered in barns, on farm roads, and in the memories of those who had depended on it daily. Urban landscapes, too, remember the Model T differently. Streets once dominated by horse-drawn wagons now teemed with modern vehicles, polished and equipped with comforts that the Tin Lizzie could never offer. Yet, city dwellers still recounted tales of their first drives: the squeak of wooden wheels replaced by rubber tires, the smell of freshly laid asphalt mingling with the exhaust of those early Fords. Even as production ceased, the Model T continued to influence automobile design. Engineers and designers studied its simplicity, learning lessons in efficiency and durability. Henry Ford's assembly line innovations became a blueprint for modern manufacturing, but the heart of his vision, the idea that a car should be accessible to the average person, remained central. In this way, the Model T's influence extended far beyond its own wheels, shaping the very future of mobility. Cultural references to the Model T grew more nostalgic over time. It became the car of childhood memories, of stories told on front porches and in community halls. Writers, filmmakers, and photographers documented the era, capturing the fading presence of Fords on quiet country lanes or in bustling town centers. Each photograph and anecdote served as a reminder of a simpler, slower rhythm of life. Yet, the sunset of the Model T era was not marked by sadness alone. It was a moment of reflection and gratitude. Families gathered to recount adventures. City dwellers reminisced about first jobs and weekend excursions, and farmers looked back on years of hard work made lighter by their dependable car. The Model T had carried them through countless journeys, both literal and metaphorical, shaping not only the roads they traveled but the stories they would pass on. Collectors soon emerged, rescuing remaining Model Ts from barns and fields. Restoration became an act of love, a way to preserve history while reconnecting with the tactile sensations of early motoring. The rumble of a restored engine, the smell of aged leather, the feel of a wooden steering wheel under one's hands. These details evoked memories not just of the car, but of a world that had moved a little slower, yet felt fuller in its simplicity. Even as new cars crowded streets and highways, the Model T retained a sacred place in the hearts of those who had lived alongside it. It became a symbol of ingenuity, perseverance, and the quiet joy of exploration. Its legacy endured in every drive that felt familiar, in every child who marveled at a restored vehicle in a museum, and in every story told about the car that had changed the course of American life. By the end of its production, the Model T had achieved what Henry Ford had dreamed of. It had transformed transportation, reshaped society, and captured the imagination of generations. Its sunset was not a disappearance, but a gentle fading into history, leaving behind a glow that would continue to illuminate roads, memories, and dreams for decades to come. Section 10. Reflections on the Model T's legacy and the birth of modern America. As the final echoes of the Model T faded from assembly lines and country roads, America began to look toward the future, forever changed by a simple car with a complex impact. The quiet hum of engines that had once carried families to town, to work, and to adventure now symbolized the birth of a new mobility, an era in which transportation was no longer a privilege, but a part of everyday life. The Model T was more than a car. It was a social revolution on four wheels. It redefined freedom, allowing people to travel farther than ever before, visit relatives in distant towns, and experience landscapes previously out of reach. Farmers reached markets faster, children could attend schools miles away from home, and urban workers could explore leisure destinations on weekends. Streets became arteries of possibility, connecting communities and ideas in ways that were previously unimaginable. In reflecting on this legacy, one can sense the quiet courage of those early drivers. Roads were rough, maps were incomplete, and cars were rudimentary, yet people embraced the adventure. They learned patience and ingenuity, changing tires on the roadside, navigating unpaved routes, and coaxing engines to life in all kinds of weather. Each journey was an education in resilience, a lesson in the interplay between technology and human determination. The Model T also left its mark on American culture. It shaped neighborhoods, influenced architecture, and even affected work patterns. Driveways, garages, and filling stations began to appear, changing how cities and towns were planned. Stories of first cars became family lore, passed down alongside recipes and photographs. In literature and early cinema, the Model T appeared as a character in its own right, sometimes a symbol of ingenuity, other times a marker of social change. Yet, the car's influence extended beyond practical utility. It quietly fostered a sense of independence, especially among those who had never imagined they could own a vehicle. Teenagers experienced newfound freedom, parents felt the reassurance of safer travel, and communities enjoyed the shared excitement of mobility. The car became a companion for personal growth, a witness to first dates, road trips, and moments of quiet reflection under open skies. Historians often note that the Model T democratized not only transportation, but ambition. It allowed ordinary people to dream beyond their immediate surroundings, inspiring creativity and entrepreneurship. Small businesses flourished because product could travel farther, services could be offered more widely, and ideas spread with greater speed. In this sense, the car did not merely move people. It moved the economy, the culture, and the collective imagination. Even decades later, the lessons of the Model T remain relevant. Its simplicity reminds engineers of the elegance of efficient design. Its affordability reminds leaders of the importance of access. Its ubiquity reminds society that innovation is most powerful when it touches lives broadly, not just selectively. The Model T was not merely a tool. It was an agent of transformation, demonstrating that progress is a blend of invention, vision, and human adaptability. As night falls over modern cities, one can almost hear echoes of the Model T along quiet streets. The gentle clatter of wheels, the scent of oil and leather mingling with the cool evening air, the rhythmic hum of an engine that once changed the nation. For those listening, these echoes are a reminder that the past is never truly gone. It lives in the rhythms of daily life, in the innovations that surround us, and in the stories we pass down to the next generation. Reflecting on the era, it becomes clear that the Model T was more than a car. It was a bridge. A bridge between eras, between isolation and connection, between work and leisure, between dreams and reality. Its presence marked a turning point, a subtle yet profound revolution that reshaped the American landscape, both physically and culturally. Every creaking barn door, every cobbled street, every roadside repair tells a story of adaptation, resilience, and quiet determination. Ultimately, the legacy of the Model T is best understood not in statistics or production numbers, but in lived experience. The first families who owned it, the children who grew up alongside it, the mechanics who kept it running, they each contributed to a shared narrative of possibility. The car taught patience, responsibility, and creativity. It encouraged exploration and fostered community. And perhaps most importantly, it offered a sense of wonder, the simple joy of pressing a pedal and feeling the world respond, mile by mile. As we drift into the modern age, it is comforting to remember that the seeds of today's connected world were planted by a humble vehicle over a century ago. The quiet streets illuminated by flickering lamps, the hum of engines winding through small towns, and the laughter of passengers embarking on their first journey all serve as enduring reminders. Progress need not roar to be revolutionary. Sometimes, it simply rolls quietly, steadily, and persistently, leaving behind stories that continue to warm our hearts as we fall asleep, dreaming of the roads yet traveled. The Model T may have reached the end of its production, but its spirit endures. In every car that carries a family across a town, in every road trip that sparks new memories, in every quiet moment of reflection on human ingenuity, the Model T whispers. Innovation is timeless, and history, like a well-loved bedtime story, has the power to transport us, gently, vividly, and endlessly.